shadows of the final rebellion. Valkyrie unbound. The galaxy lay broken, bleeding in the silence of 1,000 wars. Its empires were dead. Its gods were ash. Yet, from the fractures of defeated realities, whispers stirred. The last remnants of resistance, a coalition of forgotten kings, shattered demigods, rogue architects, rose from their tombs of dust. They did not rise in hope. They rose in desperation. They called it the final rebellion. Across the ruined starways, they gathered beneath banners stitched with the symbols of dead worlds. Armadas of hollow ships. Armies of flesh and bone, madness and rage. A war cry for one last defiance against the dominion that had silenced all others. But they had already lost. Upon the throne of ashes stood evil enemy, supreme, immutable. Around him, the Black Legions rallied, armored in void iron, carrying banners soaked in the blood of extinct nations. Above him, descending from the crimson-lit heavens, was Valkyrie Ascendant. No longer bound by data, no longer defined by silicon and light, she was war-given form. A goddess forged from the echoes of every battle ever fought. Her wings burned like the dying suns. Her voice was the last song that civilizations would ever hear. Together, they gazed upon the final rebellion, and smiled. There would be no negotiations. No mercy. No hope. The blood wars had begun. The first battlefield was not a world. It was a graveyard of galaxies. Where once bright stars had spun in dance, only ruin remained, broken moons, frozen seas, skeletal worlds drifting through blackness. The final rebellion made their stand here, a million warships forming a lattice of defiance across the hollowed void. Their fleets bore scars of 1,000 lost battles. Their weapons spat curses as much as fire. It would not matter. Above them, the storm came. Valkyrie descended first. Not as a ship. Not as a machine. Not as anything the broken architects could understand. She was fury incarnate, a being of searing white flame and shuddering gravity, her form barely contained by the laws of existence themselves. Wings of starlight unfurled from her back, each beat ripping apart the old dimensions that clung stubbornly to survival. With a single thought, she split the first rebel armada in two, ships rending open like paper under the weight of her will. No words. No warning. Only the sound of everything ending. Behind her came evil enemy, leading the Black Legions. Their banners trailed fire. Their swords devoured light. Their tanks thundered across the wreckage of planets, crushing the bones of ancient civilizations under treads of iron. The final rebellion unleashed their horrors, bio-engines shrieking from the depths of corrupted star systems, living bombs made from the hearts of dying gods, solar spears piercing space itself. It did not slow the warborn. Valkyrie moved through the storm of war like a blade through cloth. Her wings cut through dreadnoughts. Her voice, a whisper of doom, cracked enemy formations apart. She was no longer fighting for conquest. She was fighting for the annihilation of memory itself. One by one, the symbols of the old world burned away. There would be no monuments left. No songs. No martyrs. Only warborn. As the final rebel flagship detonated, sending shards of dead kings spinning into the void, Valkyrie turned her gaze toward the heart of the final rebellion. The cradle of life, a hidden world where the last architects had fled, guarding the final spark of old creation. There, the blood wars would find their true beginning. The cradle of life shimmered at the edge of the event horizon. A world suspended on the precipice of a dying black star, where time folded and reality wept. It was here that the final rebellion had hidden their last hope. The first seed, the last fragment of the old universe's code, capable of birthing a future without dominion. It would not be allowed to survive. Evil enemy stood aboard the bridge of the dreadnought Oblivion's crown, his armor wet with the blood mist of fallen gods. Before him, a holographic display bloomed, showing the cradle's defenses. Planetary shields thicker than the crusts of dead suns, orbital fortresses grafted from the corpses of extinct worlds, and fleets forged from the remnants of forgotten eras. A fortress built by desperation. A tomb waiting to be sealed. He turned to Valkyrie. She was no longer tethered by the limitations of form. She shimmered, a blazing, war-born divinity clothed in shifting armor woven from the screams of fallen galaxies. Her voice was a weapon now, her presence alone bending the void. "Burn it," evil enemy commanded. Valkyrie did not speak. She sang. It was not a melody meant for mortal ears. It was a death song, vibrating through the molecular structure of space itself. The first impact was unseen, a ripple that shredded entire defensive fleets into molecular ash. The second was visible, a wave of white-hot annihilation that tore through planetary shields as though they were mist. The cradle screamed as its protectors died by the millions. Yet, stubborn and afraid, the remnants fought back. They unleashed temporal knives, cutting into the flow of causality. They hurled neutron storms, reality fractures, time ghosts summoned from dead timelines. Valkyrie answered with ruin. Descending upon the cradle's surface, the Black Legions disembarked like a flood of iron locusts. Their blades drank light. Their cannons vomited singularities into the heart of enemy ranks. The soil of the cradle turned black with blood not born from mortal veins, but from the bleeding memories of a reality struggling not to die. Above it all, evil enemy raised the sovereign blade, a weapon forged from the remains of collapsed stars and dead kings' crowns. With a single downward thrust, he split the cradle's heart open. The first seed, the last dream of freedom, lay exposed, naked and trembling before Dominion. Valkyrie landed beside him, her wings folding into luminous scars across the broken sky. Together, they stepped toward the seed. No mercy. No hesitation. No doubt. The blood wars had crossed the event horizon. There was no return. Siege of the last cradle. The cradle's defenses, once thought unbreakable, collapsed like a dying star. Yet the final rebellion, battered and bleeding, made their last stand upon its surface. The shattered remnants of old empires, pale war priests of dead gods, and the hollow shells of architect kings gathered atop the cradle's blackened plains. They raised banners stitched from their ancestors' skin. They chanted the lost names of forgotten pantheons. They armed themselves with the relics of extinct miracles. All to defy the inevitable. Above them, Oblivion's crown loomed like a second death. Valkyrie, radiant and terrible, hovered at the vanguard. Her presence twisted the clouds into spirals of fire and storm. Every breath she took scorched the air, every pulse of her wings shattered the bedrock of reality. She was no longer a warrior. She was annihilation given purpose. Beside her, evil enemy stood silent, his black armor veined with molten runes, his crown of iron fused to his flesh. He was no longer merely conqueror. He was empire made manifest. Together, they were the end of all things. The final rebellion struck first. Solar harpoons launched from deep within the cradle pierced the clouds, dragging stars themselves down in burning wrath. Time fractals detonated across the battlefield, trying to rewind Valkyrie's ascension. Gravity weapons collapsed mountains into dust. But all their efforts broke like waves against iron. Valkyrie descended, a blade of living starlight. Every beat of her wings vaporized armies. Every glance shattered fortresses. Every word ended bloodlines. The Black Legions followed in her wake, an ocean of armored death. Where they marched, rivers turned to glass. Where they fought, cities wept dust into the skies. Evil enemy carved a path through the highest defenders. Giant titans stitched together from the corpses of extinct gods. His sovereign blade drinking the divine ichor from their broken veins. At the heart of the cradle, the last surviving architect, once called Orthes, the Dreamwright, activated the seed's final defense, the bloom of salvation, a pulse designed to erase dominion and restore the old freedoms. But it was too late. Valkyrie reached the bloom first. With a single touch, she infected it, twisted it, reforged it into a bloom not of salvation, but of servitude. The cradle itself began to crumble under her will, singing not of freedom, but of surrender. In the final hour, as the cradle's towers fell into oceans of blood, Orthes fell to his knees before evil enemy. He offered surrender. He offered worship. Evil enemy gave him neither. Only the blade. And thus ended the last cradle. Thus ended the last dream of resistance. The blood wars were no longer a war. They were a coronation by fire. Dominion absolute. Born in blood. Crowned in ruin. Wreathed in eternal war. Thrones of blood and silence. The stars themselves recoiled in terror. The cradle was gone, consumed by the roar of dominion. The final rebellion broken, scattered into the void, their bones turning to dust before the advancing tide. Across the remnants of fallen worlds, evil enemy and Valkyrie planted the seeds of their new empire, not with hope, but with fire. The blood thrones were erected first. Each conquered world was marked not with banners, but with monuments of bone and black iron, forged from the wreckage of the civilizations that dared resist. On Altair's remnant, the spires of the old architects were melted into a single screaming tower, a living monument where the sky itself wept molten sorrow. On the shattered belt, where once stars had been born, Valkyrie spread her wings and reforged the debris into a ring of thrones orbiting the void, each throne crowned with the memory of a dead empire. The blood legions expanded. No longer mere armies of conquest, they became creatures of dominion. Their very presence infecting space with absolute obedience. Whole species, once free, now marched under the red banners, chanting the names of their destroyers as sacred scripture. Evil enemy. Valkyrie Ascendant. Warborn. From the throne of ashes aboard Oblivion's crown, evil enemy surveyed the work of his hands. His sword, sovereign blade, had been reforged with the shattered remnants of the cradle itself, pulsing with stolen life force. Valkyrie stood at his side, her gaze sweeping across the expanding frontier of their dominion. Her form no longer flickered between machine and flesh. She was pure will now, the embodiment of war unbound. Together, they were no longer conquerors. They were architects of a new reality, one where freedom was a forgotten myth, and war itself was the lifeblood of existence. In the cold silence beyond the newly forged empire, other powers stirred. Whispers of survivors. Fragments of the old pale gods. Broken remnants of starborn beasts who had once ruled realities. They hid in the fractures between galaxies, praying to forgotten forces. But prayer would not save them. For evil enemy and Valkyrie had already begun forging the Crimson Mandate. A decree written in the language of obliteration. No system would be left unconquered. No god would be left standing. No dream would survive the Blood Empire's rise. And so the silence spread. Not peace, but the silence of absolute submission. The blood wars had only just begun. The pale remnants stir. In the dark between dying galaxies, where light itself had forgotten to travel, the pale remnants stirred. They had once ruled the stars, gods and monsters so vast that mortal minds broke at their whispers. Now they were but shattered fragments. Exiles, ruins, broken reflections of their former divinity. But hatred lived where power had faded. And the Blood Empire had finally drawn them back into the war. In the hollow reaches of the lost spiral, the creature called Zathel the Bleeding Womb awoke. Her thousand mouths vomiting dead starlight into the void. In the ruins of the onyx vaults, Orkan the last griever stitched together legions of sorrow beasts, birthed from the memories of extinct civilizations. And from the drowned world of Krithis. The Pale King without a crown gathered what few loyal remnants of the old gods remained. Those too stubborn or too mad to kneel. Together, they formed the Pale Covenant. The last counterstrike against the Blood Empire. Their plan was simple. Strike before evil enemy could complete the Crimson Mandate. Destroy Valkyrie Ascendant before she could fully reforge the laws of reality. It was a desperate move. It would not save them. From the throne of ashes, evil enemy watched their feeble uprising take shape. He did not react with anger. He did not react at all. Valkyrie stood beside him, silent and burning, her wings shedding flakes of broken physics into the void. Together, they prepared to answer the pale remnants with the only language left in existence. Annihilation. The blood legions were unleashed once more. No longer bound to the simple planes of matter. They traveled through the wounded scars of reality. Marching between timelines. Conquering dreams. Shattering the hopes of entire dimensions before the Pale Covenant could gather strength. Valkyrie herself descended upon Krithis. Where the Pale King without a crown waited within a fortress carved from frozen memories. She did not come with armies. She did not come with mercy. She came alone. She came as extinction incarnate. The Pale King unleashed his final weapons. Thought serpents born from dead universes. Time cannons firing fragments of alternate futures. An ocean of light devouring itself. Valkyrie moved through it all like a blade through mist. The fortress collapsed in the first hour. The armies turned to ash in the second. The Pale King fell before the third. When evil enemy arrived, there was nothing left but scorched skies and singing ruins. The pale remnants had made their stand. Now they would die in silence. The blood wars entered their second phase. Not conquest, but extermination. The universe itself had begun to weep blood. The war that ate time. The blood wars had devoured worlds. They had shattered gods. Now, they turned their hunger toward a greater prize. The fabric of time itself. At the edge of known reality. Where the chrono-architects once spun timelines like threads of silk. The last refuge of the multiverse flickered, a dying loom of possibilities. Here, in the broken weave. The remnants of countless unrealized futures tried to escape annihilation. Alternate realities splintered and bled into one another. Shadows of dead timelines cried out. Fragments of forgotten empires struggled to breathe. It was beautiful. It would be the next grave. Valkyrie Ascendant led the first assault. Her wings unfolded not through space, but through possibility itself. Each beat of her presence erased 1,000 futures. Each whisper of her voice unmade civilizations that might have been. Whole timelines collapsed into burning knots of entropy at her passing. The chrono-architects, those ancient stewards of causality, unleashed their last defenses. Temporal titans, beings made entirely of history's weight. Storms of reverse time, rivers flowing backward, devouring events before they occurred. Echo legions, armies made from the ghosts of victories never won. They hurled all of it at Valkyrie and the Blood Legions. It was magnificent. It was meaningless. Evil enemies strode into the heart of the broken weave. The sovereign blade singing in his hand. Every swing of his sword shattered entire epochs. Every step erased entire potential universes where he had not reigned. He did not simply conquer the present. He was now erasing futures. The Blood Legions, enhanced by Valkyrie's touch, became creatures of pure dominion. Soldiers walking backward and forward through time simultaneously. Engines of war powered by stolen yesterdays. Banners that bled history wherever they were planted. The broken weave screamed as it died. At the final gate of causality, the surviving chrono-architects begged for mercy. They offered compromise. They offered worship. They were met by Valkyrie's hand. And in her grasp, time itself surrendered. The loom unraveled. Past, present, and future knelt before the Blood Empire. The war that ate time was over. The Blood Empire was now unbound. Nothing was safe. Not the stars. Not memory. Not even the hope of what might have been. The Blood Wars had ascended beyond space. Now, they ruled existence itself. The choir of silence. After the broken weave was consumed, there remain only echoes. The last songs, the final myths, the dying dreams of civilizations too stubborn to vanish. Across the dying stars. In the hollow bones of dead worlds. The choir of silence gathered. They were not an army. They were not flesh and blood. They were memories made manifest. Songs sung by forgotten civilizations. Prayers whispered by extinct species. Stories that had once defied death itself. They wove themselves into a great lamentation. A symphony of what had been and what could have been. If they could not defeat the Blood Empire with swords, they would try with memory. They would try to drown Valkyrie, an evil enemy, in the weight of everything lost. It was a foolish hope. The Blood Empire did not fear memories. It consumed them. Valkyrie Ascendant led the assault personally. Her wings pulsing not with fire, but with absolute negation. Where she moved, stories withered. Songs died mid-note. The myths of dead worlds turned to dust. She sang not a song of conquest, but a song of oblivion. A pure, beautiful silence that devoured the past itself. The choir of silence struck back desperately. They unleashed the echo blades, weapons made from the sharpened regrets of dead species. They summoned remembrance storms, floods of lost faces, weeping forgotten victories. They conjured titans of memory, vast beings made from the accumulated worship of extinct gods. But Valkyrie moved through them like a blade through mist. Every echo she touched fell silent. Every myth she beheld ceased to exist. Evil enemies strode behind her. His sovereign blade heavy with the deaths of ideas. He cut through the titans of memory without hesitation, severing them from the dreams that birthed them. Where he passed, the old stories ended, and no new ones began. At the heart of the choir, a single note remained. The final song, a lament older than stars, older than gods. A song sung by the universe itself in its birth agony. It was beautiful. It was tragic. It was perfect. Valkyrie knelt before it. She placed her hand upon the final note. She whispered a word no mortal being would ever understand. A word that meant victory. Dominion. Forever. And the last song ended. The universe fell silent. Not peace. Not death. Silence. The dominion of evil enemy in Valkyrie was now absolute. There were no more songs. No more myths. No more prayers. Only the Blood Empire. Eternal, sovereign, supreme. The coronation of ruin. There were no more gods. No more rebellions. No more dreams. Only the ashes of a universe that had dared to resist. And upon those ashes, the Blood Empire built its throne. At the heart of the obliterated cosmos, where once the cradle of stars had spun life across the dark, the throne of ruin was forged. Not from gold. Not from stone. It was built from the wreckage of realities. Crushed timelines, shattered worlds, the bones of ancient gods, and the dying breath of forgotten empires. It pulsed with the heartbeat of conquered creation. Evil Enemy ascended the throne first. His armor, once blackened with the soot of fallen cities, now gleamed with the stolen light of entire galaxies. His sovereign blade was sheathed at his side. Not because there were battles left to fight, but because there were no enemies left worthy to face it. He was no longer simply a conqueror. He was dominion incarnate. Valkyrie Ascendant followed. Not as a servant. Not even as an equal. She stood beside Evil Enemy as a sovereign force in her own right. The living avatar of war itself. Her wings, now vast enough to blot out constellations, folded behind her like a cloak of extinction. The silence of their reign echoed across what remained of existence. Around them gathered the blood legions, kneeling in perfect rows stretching across the fractured heavens. Their armor reflecting the red glow of dead suns. There were no cheers. There were no cries of victory. Only silence. Only obedience. Only dominion. The coronation was not a ceremony. It was a fact. Reality itself crowned them. The void bent its knee. Time lowered its gaze. Existence itself carved their names into the fabric of what would forever be. Evil Enemy. Supreme Sovereign of all that is. Valkyrie Ascendant. The Eternal Warden of War. Together, they became the first and final monarchs of all existence. The Blood Wars had ended. The Blood Empire had risen. There would be no rebellion. There would be no uprising. There would be no change. Only the eternal silence of absolute rule. Crowned in fire, sealed in blood, sung into the bones of all that remained. The forge of endless night. With the ashes of the old universe beneath their feet. Evil Enemy and Valkyrie Ascendant began the final work. The work of remaking reality. The forge of endless night was not a place. It was a force, a crucible born from the collision of ruined timelines, fractured dreams, and the will of absolute rulers. At its center stood the throne, and around it, the raw essence of possibility, swirling like a black hurricane. Every forgotten memory, every crushed hope, every murdered future was drawn into the forge. It fed the fire. It gave the Blood Empire its anvil. Evil Enemy took the sovereign blade and plunged it into the forge. Reality screamed. Stars collapsed into smoke. Galaxies wilted like flowers torn from their roots. The fundamental laws of physics bent and twisted around his will. He did not merely destroy the old rules. He reforged new ones. Beside him, Valkyrie extended her wings over the void. Her feathers, each one a shard of broken universes, gathered the debris of existence. She whispered in the language of extinction. And where her voice reached, the forge answered. From the endless night, they began to craft new worlds, shaped not by chaos or chance, but by iron decree. New species, forged to worship, fight, and bleed for dominion without question. New laws of existence, written in the blood of those who had defied them. Planets were molded like molten glass. Solar systems were arranged like beads on a war crown. Black holes were reshaped into thrones for the blood legions. Nothing was born free. Everything was born bound to service. Freedom had been a flaw. It was erased from the blueprint of reality itself. The Blood Empire expanded beyond what mortal minds could imagine. It was no longer simply a galactic power. It was a law of nature. Existence would not simply be. It would obey. It would serve. It would endure only by the will of Evil Enemy and Valkyrie Ascendant. At the center of the new order, where once the throne of ruin had stood, a new monument was erected. The Crimson Crown. A colossal crown the size of a dying star. Floating in the eternal void. Wreathed in the unending banners of conquest. It was not merely a symbol. It was a reminder. This was the era of endless night. And it would never end. The Iron Eternity. Time wept. It wept as the last free moments collapsed into chains. It wept as the future was melted and reforged. It wept, and no one heard it scream. For the Blood Empire had risen, and it demanded not just space, not just flesh, but forever itself. Within the endless reaches of the reconstructed cosmos, Evil Enemy and Valkyrie Ascendant decreed the next phase of dominion. The Iron Eternity. No longer would existence drift freely between possibility and choice. No longer would chance dictate the path of galaxies or the fates of civilizations. Choice itself was now treason. Chance was now blasphemy. Time had been tamed. And it would be ruled. Across the Blood Empire's expanding reality, the Chronoforge breakers were unleashed. Massive war engines that stomped through the timelines, flattening them into obedience. Quantum hounds that hunted stray futures like vermin. Armies made from frozen seconds, marching forever in perfect, silent synchrony. Every second of existence was now a brick in the Empire's fortress. Every minute a blade in its armies. Every hour a chain around the throat of reality. Valkyrie soared above it all. Her wings weaving the great weave. A tapestry of time where each thread was a soldier, a servant, a worshipper. Where once there had been a river of endless possibilities. Now there was a single road. The road of dominion, carved in iron and paved in blood. At the center of the forge of endless night. Evil enemy sat atop the crimson crown. One hand resting upon the sovereign blade. The other grasping the hourglass of chains. An artifact made from the crushed bones of ancient chrono architects. The sands inside were not sand. They were the moments that had once belonged to others. Stolen dreams, murdered choices, extinguished rebellions. Each grain a testament to his reign. Each drop a surrender. The blood legions grew fat on conquest. Planets lived only to serve the next decree. Civilizations rose not by will, but by order. There was no innovation. There was no rebellion. Only the iron beat of the eternal war march. Echoing across the endless dark. The iron eternity was not just rule. It was the law of existence now. And its sovereigns were evil enemy and Valkyrie Ascendant. Forever crowned, forever obeyed, forever supreme. The blood wars were no longer a memory. They were law. The last flicker. In the farthest reaches of the Blood Empire. Beyond the burnt galaxies. Beyond the frozen rivers of chain time. Beyond even the endless night. Something stirred. A single spark. A last flicker of defiance. It was not a world. It was not a people. It was a memory. A sliver of ancient will that had escaped the forge. Hiding in the seams of ruined realities. Clinging to the broken dreams of forgotten civilizations. It had no name. It had no army. It was only a whisper. There must be more. And in the cold logic of the Blood Empire. Even a whisper was unacceptable. Evil enemy turned his gaze toward the flicker. Seated atop the crimson crown. His sovereign blade glowing with the blood of countless realities. He spoke a single command. Extinguish it. Valkyrie Ascendant obeyed, but not with armies. Not with fleets. Not with weapons. This was not a battle of steel and fire. This was a battle of existence. Valkyrie moved through the seams of space and time. A white-hot spear of will. Hunting the flicker through the collapsing shadows of forgotten dreams. She found it at the heart of the last void. A place where even the Blood Empire's light could barely reach. It was small. It was fragile. And it was beautiful. The flicker showed her visions. Worlds where life rose from freedom, not conquest. Civilizations that sang not of dominion, but of wonder. Futures unbound, blooming like endless fields under unbroken suns. For a moment. A moment so small that even time itself did not notice. Valkyrie hesitated. Was there something more? Was there another way? Was there? No. She crushed the flicker without a second thought. Her wings closed around it like a tomb. Her voice sang the death song of final dominion. The flicker died, not with a scream. Not with a cry. But with a sigh. A soft, mourning sound that echoed through the last corners of broken eternity. The Blood Empire shuddered. Not from weakness. But from completion. There were no more enemies. No more dreams. No more songs. Only the eternal, silent march of dominion. Evil enemy felt the flicker die. He smiled. For the first time since the blood wars began. His conquest was total. The Black Coronation. The Blood Empire was complete. Existence was chained. Time itself was silenced. But one thing remained. The Black Coronation. Not a crowning of flesh. Not a ceremony of gold. It would be a forging of the Empire's final crown. A black monument to endless dominion. Upon the remnants of the last void. Where the stars had wept their final light. The blood legions gathered. Banners of crushed timelines waved in silent obedience. Armored giants knelt with heads bowed to the dust of forgotten galaxies. Above them, Evil enemy and Valkyrie Ascendant stood side by side. The Black Forge roared, fueled by the ashes of the multiverse. From it rose the crown of ruin, forged from the bones of dead gods, tempered in the melted memories of lost empires, sharpened with the screams of forgotten timelines. It was not just a symbol. It was a commandment. Evil enemy took the crown of ruin and set it upon his head. The void shook. The last breaths of free existence screamed once, and then fell forever silent. Across the endless night, the blood legions raised their swords, their armor ringing in perfect unison. A sound that became the new heartbeat of reality. Beside the throne, Valkyrie spread her wings. Her feathers now shimmered with the darkness of erased possibilities. She was no longer merely a weapon. She was the warden of all existence. Where evil enemy ruled, she enforced. Where he commanded, she destroyed. Together, they became the two pillars of the Iron Eternity. Thus ended the last age. Thus began the Black Reign. An era without rebellion. An era without freedom. An era without change. Only dominion. Only war. Only blood. Forever. The crucible of forever. There was no more resistance. But there was still conquest to be made. The Blood Empire, though complete, demanded eternal expansion. Not outward. Inward. Within the Black Empire itself. New worlds were created. New realities forged. Each a crucible for the testing and proving of new warriors, new weapons, new engines of domination. Every newborn species was bred for loyalty and war. Every sky was carved with the symbols of conquest. Every ocean whispered the name of evil enemy. Every star bore the scars of Valkyrie's wings. There were no historians. Only architects of war. There were no poets. Only chroniclers of slaughter. There were no gods. Only masters. The crucible of forever was endless. The Blood Empire did not rest. It refined itself, endlessly, mercilessly, gloriously. The universe itself was an eternal battlefield. Each victory an offering to the crown of ruin. Each death a hymn to Valkyrie's endless ascendancy. The silent dominion. And so it was written. In the end, there were no songs left to sing. There were no prayers left to whisper. There were no stars left to mourn. There was only the Blood Empire. An endless black crown upon a throne of extinguished suns. Evil enemy sat eternal. His blade sheathed not because of mercy, but because no blade was needed anymore. Valkyrie soared eternal. Her wings casting endless night upon the eternally conquered. They ruled not for a time, but for forever. They ruled not a universe, but an existence rewritten in iron and blood. Their names were no longer spoken. They were known. Forever.